All right, so welcome back to the Generative AI in the Real World podcast here with O'Reilly. And today we have a fantastic guest at the front lines of helping companies work their way through generative AI. We have Tim Persons. He is an AI leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So, Tim, welcome to the Generative AI in the Real World podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ben. Great to be here.
All right, I guess let's start with giving our audience a feel for how companies are working their way through generative AI in general. So, Tim, to your best assessment, what is the current state of adoption of generative AI in the enterprise, I guess?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think I'll just say I'll give you a look at the average of sectors because there is sort of a rate of evolution and adoption with Gen AI among sectors. I think of some work that was done by Professor Charles Fine of MIT Sloan back in the 90s, who was talking about the clock speed of a given industry. It was referring to its ability to be competitive and so on. And there's different clock speeds for different industries. Like utilities are relatively slow. They're more government-like than, let's say, a tech and media company or something like that in Silicon Valley. So, but let me just speak to the average, because on average, we are seeing an uptake and adoption on that. PwC just took a general survey of CEOs, and we're seeing a larger number of CEOs mention the fact that they have plans to not only adopt, but to pursue business model reinvention, to build in trust and things like that in their business. So there is a now and not yet story. Most companies are kind of exploring or kicking the tires, as I'll call it. But there's two sort of the two tail end of things: companies that haven't even started, right, versus companies that are sort of diving in the deep end like a cannonball. Those are relatively rare. So most folks have been doing things in a sandbox, or like what we call an AI factory approach, and starting to de-risk the technologies, to build their knowledge, to build their trust and confidence, most importantly. And we're starting to see it in the more of a back-end office space, where the risks to the business are lower, and they can sort of fail more safely when they're doing that, and versus just pushing things out on the front end. But that's the current sketch of industry as a whole.
So your sense overall, Tim, that the budgets dedicated to generative AI are kind of on the upward trend?
Yes, we're seeing an increased spend on these things. I think a number of companies, including my own firm, once you start doing it, you start realizing that this is not a small spend. It doesn't mean that that's a waste of money. It just means that it might be perceived as less expensive than it is, particularly in the compute area, the usage of the model. You're billed by the number of parameters and so on. And so that you compute in any given time. So access to the more advanced models is important, but not all tasks need the most advanced models and so on to do this. But the spend is definitely increasing. It's often found in the CIO's budget. But we're also seeing increasingly a number of CXOs now turn into or become part of the chief AI officer role, or the chief data officer role, which has been around a little bit longer. So, but yes, spending is definitely on the increase.
So in terms of implementing generative AI, so what are some of the key challenges that enterprises face when they go from, let's say, an experimentation phase to an actual deployment?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think at the heart of that is moving from experimental to an operational phase is all about trust. And trust is something that's earned, which means the technology has to be allowed to show itself to earn that trust. And so it's really a robust testing, evaluation, and developmental pathway from that lower tech readiness maturity into the higher levels toward deployment. There are folks that are rightly skeptical about this, and not all AI is the same. So the risks with AI just depend on, well, what kind of AI it is, the data that it's using, the models it's using, and the problem statement that you've laid out before it. What are you actually trying to get it to do? And so testing those things out, proving it is where I think the biggest thing is. The second thing, and maybe arguably even the biggest one, is really cultural. Is just getting employees, leadership alike, both comfortable with the Gen AI technology, just understanding what it is, what it's good at, and what it's not good at. Because it's a fantastically powerful technology. It's truly a watershed, game-changing type technology, but it still is not a technology that does everything well. So that just again boils down to having that discipline on developing and advancing, investing in it based on a problem statement that's well defined, rather than just walking with the technology and say, here's what I could, here I'm doing something clever and let me try and change your life, without understanding the operators or the mission context that you're asking it to solve. So culture is a big one that implies a lot of upskilling, a lot of conversations, and in my opinion, it's not possible to over communicate on this technology.
And Tim, what do you think about the state of readiness of companies' data? Because it seems like to a large extent, people forget that when you get down to it and want something that's customized or tuned to your application or use case, you still need your own data to do that. And so, do you think that people are thinking through, like, what is a data strategy for generative AI?
Yeah, excellent point. And that's one of the big things that I and we and my firm recommend is a robust data strategy, and having data and data governance is more than just having a well-written policy document handed down from your chief data officer or CIO or somebody from the C-suite. It really is about how you operationalize that in a context of building trust. And what we're seeing is a greater focus and intentionality on data and data governance than we've ever seen before. And that's a good thing. But I think companies increasingly are waking up and realizing so much of their asset values are these intangibles like their own data, and the relative gaps they have in their data, or the relative quality challenges they have with past data. They are definitely feeling those slings and arrows now. But that said, once you get more into a way of life of focusing on quality data and focusing on fit for purpose data, and still abiding by your governance, having the right controls and things like that are necessary to manage risks with data, then you have every reason to believe, or you've laid the foundation for a bright future with AI. So definitely seeing a lot of emphasis on this, as is appropriate. And as in terms of what companies are doing, a lot of it is not just looking at the past data, but thinking about, well, we have large gaps, but let's start to curate or customize our data collection or acquisition to solve the problems that we need to solve, and do it in the right way, do it in a trusted and responsible way.
So next question is around measurement and evaluation, and two notions. I think this first one, maybe companies who were doing traditional machine learning probably are aware of, and maybe already have processes in place. This is the notion of, okay, so I'm building something, I want to measure that I am delivering the right return on investment, right? So that I can justify additional investment or rolling this out to more areas. The other notion of measurement and evaluation, I think, is a little more challenging now, which is basically, how do I know that my LLM-backed application is ready to go? Because there's a lot of new risks involved. And the additional challenge here, Tim, as you know, is it's much easier to build a kind of a decent prototype now because the tools have gotten easier, and it's actually much harder to measure whether or not this thing is ready to deploy. So you go from maybe you can build something interesting in a few days, and now someone is telling you you need 4 weeks to evaluate whether or not this thing is checks all the boxes. So two notions of measurement and evaluation.
Sure, thanks. I'll just take the first in terms of the ROI. I think it's important because I've had a lot of experience with respect to research, development, innovation, leadership, that sort of thing. And all I'll say is we often say the word R&D like it's one word, but those are actually yeah, happy to. So yeah, that's fine. I'll start over on three, two, and one. So that's a good question, Ben, about the ROI and the measurement. Let me take the ROI piece first because, in my experience as a innovation leader, as a researcher, as a advanced tech developer, um, we really do need to separate the R and the D. We say R and D like it's one thing, but those are two different things. And so parsing the ampersand, as I call it, is important. From a research perspective, I think it's um, I think the amount of juice that you get out of the squeeze of trying to do an ROI on the research level, meaning early phase, essentially small money or relatively modest investments in research to answer some fundamental questions. I don't think ROI really belongs or works well in that space. However, when you cross from the R into the D, once you've answered some questions and you say, I think there's something here and worth developing, and all of a sudden your investments do scale by 10, 100, 1,000 fold. And that's where ROI definitely comes in and needs to be done. So my counsel is that when we focus on R, don't over rotate on the ROI piece yet, but definitely do it once you've made and had a good decisioning process to move something from the R into the D column and say we really are going to put serious money into that. And that's where you want to apply a lot of metrics and so on. So on the second part of the question, the evaluation of LLMs, that is possible today. Like we can measure LLMs today. The challenge is, and I like how you use the word and evaluation, is I can take a measurement, but what does that mean in the context of what I'm asking the AI to do, and what are the risks that are always contextual to what the problem I'm trying to solve. For example, AI being used in autonomous vehicles is a different safety of life risk than, let's say, AI in a medical device, right? It's both, they're both involving medical safety of human life type things, but the way you regulate, the way you measure them is inherently different. So I think that's a lot of the frontier of AI in science and is really a fundamental element of what's just been stood up at the national level with the AI Safety Institute Consortium, which was an outcome of the President Biden's Executive Order 14110, which was on the safe, secure, trustworthy development and use of AI. And so NIST is our National Institute of Standards and Technology, has a consortium on AI safety to do this evaluation. And PwC is proud to be part of that consortium. There's many other big tech companies or other things, the language models, all those folks that are there. But we all collectively are working on this issue of how do you measure and then evaluate, the evaluation piece has to be in the context of what you're asking it to do and the problem you're trying to solve.
And it seems like, Tim, now that this technology lends itself to really cross-functional collaboration across many teams, this is an area where companies, I think, should invest in a little bit of education of the workforce, right? So just
Absolutely.
to kind of lay out what are the limitations and actual capabilities, because the reality is, even if you use these things properly and correctly, they will still do unintended things.
That's right. And I think part of the upskilling and or talent acquisition or talent partnership is not just, it does involve everything where it's data scientists, machine learning experts, AI, generative AI type experts, folks with statistical computing experience and random forest, let's say. All of that is yes, but it really is, I think, you said it well, this requires or demands an interdisciplinarity that I've never seen any other tech require, and I think that's good. But it does mean a lot of the organizational culture change and the way internal organizations communicate and partner together in an organic manner in a very agile, fluid, flexible way with the technology that the technology allows, frankly. Is a really good thing, but that's a big part of that culture change, not just understanding it, but how you apply it so that you're really doing a business model reinvention internally for whatever it is that your current business, your business is trying to accomplish.
And actually, I think, Tim, I think sometimes I think people underestimate also the importance of bringing good user interface into some of these applications, because one, the applications we're seeing now tend to be co-pilots, so you really want a good user experience to begin with anyway. And secondly, you can gather good feedback to actually improve your model and application if you just think through a little bit some of that user experience and user interface.
That's exactly right, and that brings up the design type thinking that I think these interdisciplinary teams that need to emerge with all these various skills need to apply to do that, and focus on the end user first, that experience, and work backward from that and say, how do we deliver that? Not just take an LLM and say, okay, we can start to throw data at it. What are we going to do with it? It really does start with that user and problem experience, working backward and getting to those tech, applying that where it's as appropriate, getting your you mentioned fine tuning and things like that. There's lots of value companies are going to see by increasingly mining their own proprietary data and keeping them themselves, but generating new value and insights that they've never been able to do before, and at a scale and speed they've never been able to do before.
All right, so let's turn to use cases, and this is where I think I'm really super excited to talk to you, because you probably talk to companies across many different industries. So at this point, what are some of the most common use cases that you're seeing for generative AI?
Yeah, I think that one of the most common is really just, I think of, let me speak about the internal thing. So I could easily just say a lot of the you mentioned Copilot, but any of these things that are out there for commoditized Gen AI uses, they're the creative uses and marketing and so on. Those are all easy wins and easy to point at. But looking at the back office or a lot of the support functions of organizations, I'm seeing things where when you have a corpus of information that is customized to you and or your mission. Let's take a company's office of general counsel, right? So they're attorneys, but they work for a company that works in a sector that almost always has some amount of regulation, and certainly has statutes it has to abide by. So if you're going to deploy and do things in AI, or you're trying to accomplish various compliance functions, then I'm seeing the rise of fit for purpose, customized chatbots and things for these back office or key support functions. And so it's powerful because you can have, let's say in the general counsel case, you can have the best lawyers in corporate America, but you're not going to have, even if they were to work 24/7, which they don't, they're not going to have the ability to look across and read everything possible in their corpus for some company that may have been for a long time, and or as well as keep up with the changes that are coming in terms of statute or policy, regulation, etc. So that's a case where a key use case are fit for purpose chatbots to those kind of things that are, it's not just a general language model, it's something that's augmenting using something like retrieval augmentation generation or fine-tuning approaches on a smaller language model, but using your own data. That is very powerful. So that's one. On the contract side, I'm seeing contracting officers be able to look and evaluate their contracts over time and space and the details and manage those particular things very well. I lead our work in terms of what we're doing for AI, and that includes governance. So a lot of this is seeing the use of AI just to build and track inventories and to help do sense making. It's not necessarily AI in the audit, but it's AI for the audit. And so helping, my global audit workforce, which is, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, is critically important to be able to have them be able to make sense at a scale and speed that they've never been able to do before. So those are at least three key or easy examples that go above and beyond the commodity ones that I see out in the public.
That's interesting. I actually just looked at job postings in June, job postings pertaining to generative AI, and the three top areas of applications are very similar to what you mentioned: customer experience,
Yep.
customer support enhancement, business process automation,
Yep.
use it from contract drafting, data entry, and then interestingly, data analysis and insights, right? So I'm increasingly seeing this too. People are using it to ask questions of databases and things like that, and basically draft preliminary findings, right? So
That's right. And what's exciting is what's estimated when you think about just the academic literature. Researchers like at Stanford or MIT are finding, the future, especially for, white collar professional workforce, is going to be a massive shift, up to 40% savings in labor. But it's not just about labor savings alone, right? It is extracting or driving costs down. That's true. But it's not about limiting labor pools. It's about shifting the column of or increasing the value of those labor investments into more time to be, let's say, a better attorney or a better contract officer or a better customer service entity. I really like a paper that came out of Stanford. Colleague Eric Brynjolfsson at the Stanford.
Eric's customer support paper, right?
Yeah, and the cool
Yeah.
thing about it wasn't you might focus on the 14% savings, right? To say, oh, it saved 14% labor, but that was not the only thing. What excited me about that work, and there's others that I'm seeing come out. But what excited me is not just the 14%. It was the fact that you had it exponentiated the learning and development curve for any rookie customer. They're going to walk in the door, they don't know anything about the business. The AI was able to capture key value, key lessons learned, and allow the upskilling to be much more hockey stick than linear for the younger folk, right? It also helped increase the staff that you did have a hand because that you had generative AI assisting them. They were able to get questions answered faster, and it meant that their life was easier because customers were not as frictional or grumpy, for things taking long to get to an answer. So it was an improved quality of life, and therefore, then the other thing was their attrition numbers went down. People stayed longer because the job and life improvement was better, and so the customers are happier, your employees are happier, and you save costs. It was win-win-win. So I thought that was a great story because I think that's a vignette of what I'm seeing and what I'm excited about, what I'm doing at PwC to bring this to our global audit practice. And I think the future is quite bright if we can get it right.
By the way, what's to put that paper in context? ChatGPT came out November 2022. I think that paper came out mid 2023.
Yes.
So you can imagine the excitement people had because basically, one, it showed that a fine-tuned model with a little bit of retrieval augmented generation, as Tim pointed out, already led to this double-digit increase in productivity. But that was so early on.
Yep.
Now we know much more.
Right.
You can imagine if they revisit that system now, probably the ROI is much higher.
Absolutely. So, and that's right. I like to say we've seen, Ben, the floor, right? We haven't seen the ceiling of this technology. Everything that's coming out now has been that we know about is the floor, and it's only going to get better. And so it's very exciting. I completely agree.
So do you have like a checklist or a playbook to help companies think through and prioritize use cases? So this is a technology where some leader might have. I have 50 ideas, right? So,
Yeah.
but how do I prioritize?
Yeah, and part of it is I like to think of it in a different term in terms of just what problems do I need to solve, right? Because sometimes use case could mean I run a prompt on something and then I change the prompt by a few words and then that's a new use case, right? And that could be true, but I still like to think more of an inventory from a problem-centric approach, which I think is a better way to do more sustainable R&D and so on, which increases what you can move from that R column into the D column, like we were talking about before, and to increase frankly the batting average of that as you move something in development. It's still not a done deal, because when you develop something and then deploy it, doing it at scale is a big deal, and those are different risks, right? Tech maturation is different than scale deployment, and so yeah, I think that is a key challenge that companies are facing, and so we endorse this design problem-centric type approach based on their business. What is it that they're trying to do? Really think about that. And yes, to have and build that sandbox or AI factory or infrastructure that's necessary so that you can, you know, like the Valley talks about failing fast, right? But you fail intelligently and you learn. It's otherwise known as learning, right? So when you learn on how to do something, you're trying that out. It really does drive greater probabilities of success downstream as you move through the development cycle and forward, and that's there. We already talked about I'll just re-mention it just because it was a great part of your question earlier, Ben, which is that cultural, having the leadership involved, making sure expectations are managed about what this means for, you want to have a high failure rate in your environment, because if you don't, it just means you're probably not trying as hard, and that's just part of the life of a researcher is. But those few things that do come out in the developmental space, you do want to have a different project management focus and lens that's put on that. So it's not just viewed as a science experiment. It's viewed as something that, hey, this could really change our lives in a good way operationally, and let's invest in this and mature it into the higher levels of the maturity scale. So those are some of the things that we talk about in these conversations with our clients.
So for listeners who work at large companies, Tim, so are there best practices for how some of the, I would say, companies that are really AI role models for our listeners, do they have best practices for how they share learnings across different groups? Because you can imagine you want to try a RAG system for customer support, but hey, this other division already
Yeah.
had something going on. So is there so back in the day, I don't know what happened to this term, but there was this notion of centers of excellence.
Yes.
Is there a similar movement around AI centers of excellence?
Yes, we've seen centers of excellence rise and come up. That's sort of a focal point for this interdisciplinary and even sort of multi-level parts of the organization be able to come in. So even sort of the big boss has the ability to come in and listen, and even your younger staff, who frankly at times I have really fantastic innovative ideas. They need to be given the space and they need to be nurtured or watered with encouragement to say, hey, we did this. And even more importantly is to say, hey, I did this and it didn't work out, but here's what we learned, right? So the idea for a lot of this is creating that environment where innovation can occur. And so I am excited about Gen AI just because it's to me, it's the most democratized technology in human history, right? The way it went hockey stick with its user base, but also the fact that it lowered the barrier of entry to employees who don't have to have a PhD from Carnegie Mellon, let's say, in computer science in order to use it, right? So we've moved into a time where they can do things. You still do need to have those data scientists, those data engineers, software developers, et cetera, that have those specific skills. But against that interdisciplinary ecosystem, the center of excellence idea, as you mentioned, Ben, is a good approach. And when companies encourage and reward sharing, and sharing, it means you can even say, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. It's not just a show of saying, hey, here's my glossy outcome that, you had to do some hero experiment to do. It really does, when you have that nice interchange of ideas and sharing, it really engenders great ideas among the collective learns, and your business model process continues its evolution at a faster rate than if you don't do that, and if you're too hierarchical, etc.
So let's close with workforce and workforce training, since O'Reilly, after all, is a learning platform. So, Tim, maybe you can share with us what you've seen some of the leading companies have done well in terms of preparing their workforce for generative AI.
Yeah, it's great. I'm happy to brag on my own firm on this, just because we put a major investment into something we called My AI. So we had announced last year a $1 billion investment last spring, and most of that wasn't just putting money outside our firm to various tech vendors. I mean, we do partner with all of the major the tech vendor, or we have alliances with them, but it was really focused on the spend on the ability to have this. Let's get it into the hands of our users in a democratized way as quickly as possible, and that included down to our entry-level interns, because again, we want to leverage that, and we're seeing tremendous benefits from that. But it was an intentional L&D process where it was very focused on this AI, and it was like saying, look, we're going to give you the tools. And it was also, what I liked about it, it gave a safe space to do it, like, because we could use our language models, but we could do it within our secure cloud instance. And so that, because we're stewards of not only our own data, but so many of our clients' data, we have to be ever vigilant on making sure that we maintain that confidentiality, and we do. But it allowed us to have our cake and eat it too, by having that sandbox at scale, and even not only at the U.S. firm, but now it's expanded globally, where we have our chatbot available, and you could do the RAG approaches, you could do various things and experiments to test things out. So that's a good way to do things. We had trained on prompting, we've trained on data, and we've trained on, or we've had instead of hackathons, it's like a promptathon kind of thing, or just getting folks together and having fun about who could do the best prompt or the best outcome or the best thing of whatever problem we're trying to solve. So yeah, lots of good things go out, but it looks a lot like that.
I love it, because it's learning by doing.
Exactly. Right.
And basically, and it's also fun.
Yes, right. And again, it can be done and customized to a company or a firm, where your stuff doesn't go to the language model, because we were realistic. We knew that if we didn't provide this, our young folks have smartphones. They could just easily go on and start prompting out in more of the in an uncontrolled environment, an uncontrolled way, and that wasn't desirable. So it was being realistic, the fact that it's going to happen. And so instead of creating a black market system, right, you have a overt and encouraged and intentional way of saying, here's how let's learn by doing. As you said, it's just like, to me, how I learned years ago when I first ran into the first search engine. It was just a text box. I didn't know what to do with it. But eventually, by using it, you start learning and say, oh, this is what it could do. This is how it does. This is what it doesn't do, etc. And that's the journey we've been on, and are excited about where we're going forward.
And with that, thank you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Ben. It's great to be with you.